I'm Chad Harvey, and this is AI for the C-Suite, the show for senior leaders who know AI matters and need to figure out what to do about it. Each episode, we dig into what it all actually means for middle market organizations, how it's changing decisions, strategy, leadership, and the nature of work. Let's get into it. Today, I'm joined by Ondar Tarlow, a marketing exec with more than 20 years of experience building brands in financial services, motorsports, and lifestyle industries. Ondar served as Chief Marketing Officer at Connecta Federal Credit Union and Pacific Premier Bank, where he led campaigns that generated over $1.7 billion in product volume and earned him Diamond Awards and a Top 100 marketer recognition. Ondar's perspective is especially relevant for our listeners because he didn't just watch AI happen from the sidelines. He rolled up his sleeves and put it to work. His team used propensity modeling and machine learning to transform how they targeted customers and then layered in generative AI tools to overhaul their creative workflows. We're talking 5 times improvement in campaign performance and 75% reductions in production time. Ondar, welcome to AI for the C-Suite.
Hey, Chad. How are you?
I am doing really well, and I got to say, I am super excited to have you on today because the natural approach point for a lot of organizations is through marketing. And then I also get a lot of questions from folks about highly regulated industries, and you were in that as well. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. That's true. Yeah. No, I'm happy to be here.
Good, good. Well, every superhero has an origin story. So let's talk about your AI origin story. Maybe take me back to the moment that AI stopped being abstract for you and started being something that you needed to act on. I'm sure that you saw something in the world of marketing that made you take notice and say, we really need to lean into this. So what was that? What did that look like? How did your experience unfold there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, AI has moved so quickly over the last few years that, you're talking about something a month ago, and it could have already advanced tremendously beyond that. And the way you're using it today is totally different. So, but going back to the origin question, was really working with some very, very smart folks in our business intelligence team who were utilizing AI and ML, machine learning, for some time and identifying, okay, how can we take a look at our book of business, our existing customers, existing members on the credit union side, and figure out how we can do better for them, right? How can we identify what types of products they might need on the financial side, whether that be a credit card, whether that be a personal loan, whether that be something on the wealth management side, is to figure out exactly what made the most sense. And so by being able to dig in and be able to do things like A/B testing between utilizing the propensity modeling in comparison to general filters, and then figuring out, what actually was working and why was it working. So once we started seeing pickup in terms of simple campaigns like email marketing and simple factors in terms of moving forward, like email open rate increasing dramatically, and then conversion rates driving up as well. And we knew there was something to that. And so that we continued to kind of push on the accelerator to figure out exactly where we could go from there. So that was kind of like the aha moment, but obviously everything that was happening around us at the time, and obviously continues exponentially now as far as AI, right? Both on kind of the AI learning and modeling as far as data is concerned, and then also on the Gen AI side, which a lot of teams in marketing started to use a couple of years ago, or very immature versions of Gen AI, whether it's for image creation, content creation, or other, and now taking a look at where it is today. Also, being able to figure out exactly when you say AI, what does that mean? And then figuring out not so much, hey, we're going to go use AI for X, Y, and Z, but more along the lines of starting off of what is the strategy overall as far as the company is concerned? How is marketing supporting that strategy? And then how can we integrate AI into the entire workflow that we have? I think that's really key. And you had a lot of marketing teams, including ourselves, that started off on the content side, right? So to help become a little bit more efficient. So starting off with ideation and then working into things like social media and other elements that content creation comes into. But then at the same time, alongside that, and you always have to keep this in mind as far as regulated industries, so I'm glad you brought that up, is the fear factor, right? So there's the fear factor in terms of, okay, what does AI mean? What are the issues as far as IP rights are concerned in terms of content, as well as in terms of images that are used? And so we were basically doing a lot of research at the same time and figuring out exactly how we could use it effectively. And then kind of fast forward to today, where I'm doing a lot of consulting and utilizing AI in a manner of which I can become more and more efficient for clients and asking the right questions and not just looking at AI as a search engine, which a lot of people still do, right? It's like, oh yeah, no, I just use ChatGPT, versus Google.
Right.
Well, I mean, you're really not even scratching the surface as
Yeah.
far as the power of how you can use it as really an assistant. And then, of course, keeping in check whether you're in a regulated industry or not, always keeping in check with what are the sources of the information. And so I constantly hammer on that because you still see it. It happens, I would say, less from where I am than it did a year or two ago. But you still see those hallucinations from time to time as far as Gen AI is concerned. And you need to make sure that you are double checking all of the work. You're not just copying and pasting. They really understand the sources. And then you're utilizing it as a way, as I mentioned, to become more efficient and to be able to do more in a shorter period of time, that it has more impact, and then be able to utilize and test it along the way.
I'm very interested in what the conversation looked and sounded like when you initially had it. And let me just give you some context for where I'm asking this question from. You've been there, you've done that. You have been, as Dean Acheson famously wrote in his book titled President Creation, right? You worked for an organization that leaned into this technology early on. I can tell you, because I also do a lot of consulting, I've gotten called into 6, maybe 8 different banks and credit unions over the last couple of years. And with the exception of some very broad stuff, almost none of them want to move forward, which is something I see a lot of in the middle market right now, an awful lot of foot dragging. I think 2026 is going to be a big wake-up year for a lot of people, in many ways, positive and negative. Be that as it may. The highly regulated industries, the financial services sector in particular, seems very reluctant to move forward. So did you have to sell this? Did you have to pitch it to the leadership team? Or was it pretty much, okay, hey, the guys over in BI or the gals did what they needed to do. They've kind of cracked open the door. This is aligned with our strategy. Away we go. What did the conversation look like? I'm fascinated by that just because of all the roadblocks I see out there with organizations.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, in the industry, whether it's financial services or others, is there's such a varying degree in terms of experience. You have people who are, getting close to being advanced. I'd say it's difficult to really call anyone in the field an expert nowadays, considering how quickly it's moving and how you're utilizing it in your, kind of day-to-day or strategic work. But basically, the conversations were kind of to your point, which is you had the BI team that had kind of opened it up in terms of the analytics end of things, which was great. But again, that's different than the Gen AI side. And what I mean by that is, okay, now we're going to see if we can utilize it for imagery to be able to become more efficient and faster in terms of creation of advertising, et cetera, as well as content creation. So the conversations were continual. But also there was leadership in the C-suite and in other areas of the operation that could see that we needed to lean into it to really be able to figure it out, but also be able to put guardrails around it so that we didn't step too far to one side or the other where there would be issues later on. And so I believe that the organization did the right thing in terms of understanding that they needed to not necessarily be on the bleeding edge of it, but they definitely needed to be more on the leading side than, to your point, kind of dragging along the way. So the conversations dealt everywhere from more of the legal implications from an IP side all the way to the data side. And so there were committees that were set up, right? Typically always having something as a committee that are set up in order to identify exactly what this is technology wise and how we potentially use it and benefit from it. And so that approach is an important one that not only at the C-suite level, but at the levels across the organization, they really are forming teams to basically say there are definitely opportunities for us to become more efficient as an organization. There are opportunities for us to be able to leverage these tools across all the software we're using, whether it's CRM, the Microsoft suite, whatever it is, for us to get better at what we're doing. But we need to also be smart at the same time and understand what we need to do as far as the guardrails are concerned. So as we're testing things out, we're not launching something without understanding exactly what the implications may be.
Mm-hmm. If you were going to counsel or coach somebody that's in a comparable role to where you used to be as a CMO for an organization, maybe in a regulated industry or not, what's one thing that you would tell them to be prepared to address head on, and what's maybe one tip that you could give them if they're looking to try and bring generative AI tools into the organization? Then we'll start moving forward with the conversation here, but I feel like we've got such a wide range of experience sets out there with organizations in terms of maturity about where they are on their AI journey. I know a lot of people are still having conversations that you had 3 years ago. So what can you share with us there?
Yeah. So first of all, it should not be compartmentalized, and what I mean by that is should not be within one specific department, which typically things that seem technical in nature are typically in the IT world to begin with,
Right.
which is a mistake. The reason it's a mistake is because AI integrates with everything across the board, and so if you house it within one specific area because you feel comfortable with it, you're going to lose out in terms of what opportunities there are across the organization. So even if it seems a little concerning, right, and it does seem technical in nature, you need to dig in. So what I would say to anyone that I'm consulting with is they have to dig in. They have to learn it. They can't sit on the sidelines and look at it and say, "Oh, you know what? Let's have, our CIO lead this, or let's have our CMO lead this." And they really need to dig in and understand themselves. They need to be able to really understand by utilizing it, and not just utilizing a chat GPT as an example as a search engine, but looking at what they're doing day to day and figure out by testing, figure out how they themselves can become more efficient, because it's across the board. Obviously, it's with customer service, it's with, customer experience. It really is soup to nuts nowadays. And so really the genie's out of the bottle. And so if you believe that it can be contained within one area or the next, you're going to be missing out tremendously. And so you have to look at it kind of from the standpoint of what tools should we use, right? It's chat, it's Claude, or it's more developed tools that are very specific for industries, legal, etc. And really look at it from a standpoint as a starting point of efficiency. So where are we leaking time, right? Where do we spend a lot of time? Let's look at our entire workflow, department to department. Where do we spend a lot of time, and how can AI, as our assistant, if you will, help with reducing time to market for various things, whether it's products and product development, whether it's technology, whether it's marketing, across the board.
Love it. If this interview stopped right there, I think you just gave our listeners some solid gold. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Ondar.
It's all by trial and error. Trust me.
Yeah, right. I get it.
Continually.
Failing forward. That's right. All right. I want to go back to one of the things you touched on before and dig a little bit deeper here. I want to talk about the propensity modeling and the email marketing segmentation that you referred to. I'm interested in maybe having you walk us through a little bit more how that worked, and what were you trying to predict versus what the data actually told you? Because I've had some conversations with folks where what they thought they were going to end up with, they didn't actually end up with. And maybe that was your experience, maybe it wasn't. So walk us through what worked and what were you trying to predict, and what did the data tell you?
Sure. Yeah. So what I can share is basically what we were looking at is kind of, if you will, kind of the next best product, so to speak, right? So if you're dealing with a client in financial services, let's say in banking, we were basically looking at and saying, okay, here are the set of products that they have. And then based on the accounts that they have, based on their behavior, everything we can collect about them, plus additional data that we had available, what would make the most sense in terms of their need? So as I was speaking about earlier, Is it looking as though they may need a personal loan because they're drawing down a lot from their deposits or other activities are occurring? Or is it something where a credit card might be helpful for them? Digging into that and being able to run models was really what we were working with on the BI side. And so on the BI team, working with a lot of experts as far as data analytics and identifying based on what we were looking to do. So we basically, again, we had to start at the strategy is, where did we need to generate not only business, but that business then could support our customer set, right? So it's really all in one. And starting off with that point to then take a look and say, okay, what can we model, and then what can we test? And so, as an example, let's say that we were looking at it and saying, okay, we want to make sure that our customers are healthy as far as finances are concerned, right? And what does that look like? And so, being able to then work with the BI team to be able to model that, come back and then look at the entire customer set and say, okay, here we have identified these different tranches of customers that need different types of products, and then being able to test that out. And so again, it's trial by error or trial and error in terms of trying to figure out, okay, what is going to work. So an easy method for that, as far as marketing medium is concerned, or easier, I should say, was email marketing. So first off, putting out opportunities for our existing customers and figuring out what resonated. So based on looking at it on one side of kind of that A/B testing, here's the standard filters that we would select. And then let's look at that against a list that was essentially created by utilizing those propensity models and then comparing the two. And what we saw then was that much larger increase in open rate, which means that there's higher interest, and then all the way down the funnel to conversion as well.
So how long did it take from, say, the initial model build to getting meaningful results? Because I think you walked through a couple different phases there. I'm just interested, maybe it's months, maybe it was a year. How long did that take?
Yeah, so just to start off with, it was probably more than 6 months, because this is also earlier in kind of the AI days. So things weren't as advanced, things didn't move as quickly. Even now, I can see out in the marketplace this taking much less time as long as you have access to the data. I mean, the data is still very key, and then being able to also merge other data sources as well. So it definitely took a fairly significant amount of time, but that amount of time has definitely been decreased over the past year or so, just with the advancement in tools and the speed of utilization of AI overall.
And the improvement that you saw with the click to open rates and some of the other positive indicators that you saw, were you able to put that into real dollar terms for the business, or as a percentage of net profit, or how were you measuring success, and what kind of success did you see there in terms of bottom line impact?
Yeah, so what I can share is that we were taking a look at it overall in terms of product volume across specific products, and then also products per customer or products per member, as you would say, kind of in the CU world, identifying where we're at one point in time to the next point in time, and then what did that look like as far as the bottom line. So we looked at it in multiple ways to be able to figure out, is it actually being effective or not? And what we saw is that it was being effective, and so we were utilizing it more and more. Then you kind of fast forward also in terms of being able to utilize AI within other tools as well, which also help with the overall, not only awareness, but also overall conversion as far as those products are concerned. So utilization for members of the customer service team, right? Whether you're utilizing a CRM or you're utilizing other tools to help be able to push that forward, right? So not just utilizing email to make that effective, but really across the board with every touch point that you can.
Got it. Well, and I think that's a perfect segue into something I wanted to ask you about. When you and I chatted before our call, you talked about the key not being specific AI tools or identifying specific AI tools, but figuring out where they fit in existing workflows. And so I'm wondering if we can dig into that a little bit, since you touched on that with a couple different departments there. What does a workflow first AI adoption look like in practice?
Yeah, so first off, again, you need to take a look at what is your workflow, right? As you're working on, let's say, a campaign on the marketing side. How are you starting off, right? Is it starting off with you are looking at generating content to begin with, right? As a starting point after you've got the strategy and the business case, et cetera. So that if you're looking at beginning with content, what tools can you use in order to make that process not only more efficient, but also be able to leverage it just from a power perspective. So what tools can you utilize to be able to fit in? So it's really mapping out the workflow and then figuring out at this point, let's try this. At this next point, let's try this. But not looking at it as a replacement to begin with, but looking as an assistant along the way. And essentially, how you can empower your team to be able to utilize those tools to be able to do more effectively in a shorter period of time.
Did you find that people attempted or maybe desired to use those tools outside of a defined workflow since they had this shiny new toy?
For sure. I mean, it's any good marketer is going to be curious, but you need to also, of course, have those, as we talked about, those kind of those guardrails. But you need to be able to also be able to test and be able to figure out things, on your own as well. I think the interesting thing is that maybe it was roughly around 2 years ago. I was in several different meetings at conferences, and the big debate was people being so concerned about AI replacing their jobs, right? Which is still a concern today. What I did see with various marketing teams that I would interact with, plus my own, is a lot of curiosity in terms of how they could figure out to essentially help them to be more empowered in their role. And so while I believe that fear, and in certain instances, rightly so, still exists out there, I think that the people who are doing very, very well are also looking at it as how they can basically empower themselves to do more, right? So whether it's a designer that is utilizing tools, within the Creative Suite for Adobe and utilizing AI within Photoshop, which has gotten much, much better, still not perfect, but much better than it used to be. I don't see that as so much a replacement for them as it is a way for them to become more efficient. And then, of course, with tools like Adobe, you have more of that walled garden, so you have less IP issues. Of course, nowadays, and you're utilizing, Gemini or utilizing ChatGPT, the image creation is increased exponentially. But then if you're working within a regulated environment, are you really allowed to utilize those images? Or is it more just you're trying to figure out, what you can generate from ideas and utilizing it as far as storyboarding? Because that is also an effective way to utilize Gen AI. Is you might not be creating a product that's going to go out to market, but you can conceptualize things which help to speed up not only the strategic process, but also the creative process as well.
I think that was a really solid example of how you provide, you may have even used the term, a walled garden for people to go play in. Have you found that outside of specific tool set suites like that, that organizations you're consulting with like to set up or are interested in setting up their own walled garden? So, do they deploy their own Claude models in an Azure or a Bedrock stack or things like that, and then just say to folks, hey, here's this tool, go try it out? Or are more organizations really focused on identifying that workflow first and getting people adapted into that type of mindset? What are you seeing? Or are you seeing both? What do you see out there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I see both because it depends on the maturity of the organization, right? So the organizations that are a little bit more mature and have had time to kind of work with AI for a little bit longer are setting up more of those walled gardens and the ability to kind of detail and look at the workflow as opposed to kind of just, looking at one tool and the other and it not really being connected or integrated into their workflow. So I think it depends on the experience of the individual and also the maturity of the organization. But what I always recommend is starting off and taking a look at first, what's the strategy for the company overall? On the marketing side, where does marketing fit into that strategy? And making sure that you really map out your entire workflow and figuring out what tools you can utilize in order to make that workflow more efficient to support the overall company strategy.
Let's go back to, again, one of the things you touched on initially, working in a highly regulated industry, because financial services, you've got compliance considerations that a lot of other sectors simply don't. And so I feel like, based on my experience and what you're saying in our conversation today, there's a tension there. And that tension, that, as I see it, is that tension between the desire to move fast and then the compliance needs. So I'm interested, how did you navigate that tension, and how do you, with your clients today, navigate that tension between moving fast and compliance needs?
Yeah, so for sure. I mean, AI can definitely amplify the risk for sure. And
Yeah.
so it's about, first, if you're working in that regulated environment, small, mid, or large size companies, is as most smart marketers would do, is to create alignment between the compliance team, marketing team, and other teams that are involved in that process, legal as well. Sometimes within the legal side, the compliance is plugged in, or sometimes they're separate departments but work together. So, first off is to create alignment, right? In that they're all working towards the same goal for the same strategy, and not getting too far ahead before you're checking in. And what I mean by that is that obviously marketers are very curious. They like to experiment, which is a good thing. But at the same time, you need to be eyes wide open about that and make sure that you're partnering up with the compliance, the risk teams, legal teams, and be able to create something where, because you're in alignment, then you have the ability to test things as well. And so you're testing things obviously internally first, calling upon industry information as well, and then trying to figure out what you can utilize in order to put out, into the market, with still staying within the compliance that you need to be. But you also need to be brave in the sense that you're looking at it from a marketing standpoint to support the organization. And so there are business decisions that need to be made. And as long as you are following what you need to as far as guidelines are concerned for whatever regulated industry you are, you also still need to be kind of at the forefront of leading things, as opposed to sitting back and being told what to do.
I absolutely love how you finished up your remarks on that question there with this idea of being brave. I can't tell you how many C-suites I've walked into where I find cowardice that is masquerading as responsibility, right? And so this idea of being brave and leaning into this change moment that we're in right now, I think that's really solid advice. So I'm really glad that you went there, because that's an underappreciated aspect of this, is that so many times, especially in compliance-based industries, we have leaders that are managing the risk. And I think they manage the risk so much that they don't see the boulder that's bearing down on them, a la Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, right? So there's a point where your risk mitigation, I think, turns against you and bites you quite hard.
That's true. And you're going to see that from competitors, right?
Yes.
So if you're in the financial services area, you're going to have competitors that just naturally, based on the size of the organization or perhaps the rules around it, can move quicker than you. And so if they're in fintech, as an example, they're not necessarily, quote unquote, a bank or a credit union. Obviously, there's still rules and regulations around that. But by nature, some of those smaller, more nimble companies are going to sometimes be able to beat you to the market. So you have to look at that standpoint and also figure out, okay, well, then what can we do in order to help us, as opposed to just reacting, or, like you were saying earlier, just being a laggard. And if you're a laggard, someone else is going to take your business. That's just the way it is.
I don't think that there's a widespread appreciation of how fast those laggards are going to have their lunch eaten over the next 2 years.
It's already happening.
It's absolutely happening, and
Yeah.
it's really clear to me that we've got the ability now for 2, 5, and 10 person firms to punch with the weight of 50, 100, 500 person firms if they're leveraging the proper tools. And so many folks just don't see that yet, and it's going to be interesting.
No, for sure. And your point is well taken, in that in the past, you look at, let's just say, a mid-sized bank as an example, which of course I worked for a few. Mid-sized bank, they've got a good strategy, they've got good products, they're well accepted in the marketplace. But who are their competitors? Their competitors are the super banks, right? Mm-hmm. They are a Chase, they are a B of A, they are a Citi, they are a US Bank, they're a Wells Fargo, who have marketing departments in the hundreds. And in your mid-sized bank, your marketing department might be 10 people, might be 15 people at the most. Maybe you're using an agency outside, maybe you're not. This is really where, to your point, you have the ability to punch above your weight. Again, always keeping in line with the regulations and making sure that you're covering the risk as much as makes sense, but also not shooting yourself in the foot, or to your point, kind of relying on the responsibility cloak of why not to do something. This is where you have a lot of opportunity. And the same in the consulting side. You might be a one, two, or three man or woman organization. You have the ability now to compete because you're able to utilize tools better than others.
Absolutely. All right. So since you ended that remark on tools, let's shift back to tools and let's talk about generative AI. And I'm less interested in specific tool endorsements, but I know that you and your team use ChatGPT. They used Adobe Firefly. I know in your consultative practice you're recommending a lot of different tools out there for content creation and design. What's your process, either back then or now? Maybe it's evolved. I hope it's evolved. But what's your process for deciding which tools to adopt, and just as importantly, which ones to say, "Nope, see you later," and take a pass on?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So first of all, I'm just going to state I am not an expert in any tool, and I think anyone that tells you they're an expert in a tool with AI, you might want to second guess that. But by saying that, you really have to test them, and so you really have to get involved in figuring out. As an example, everybody talks about prompts. Prompts are important, but it's also the information that you're putting into the AI and figuring that out. So you were talking about ChatGPT. So the paid version of ChatGPT, that is a tremendous help and has come a long way. But you also need to be able to add a certain amount of information into it in order for it to learn, understand, and be able to work with you, right? In that kind of assistant capacity. And so to begin with is really being able to share, what the strategy is. Certain information you don't necessarily want to put in, but you also need to obviously make sure you have all of the settings set up properly so that you can feel a little bit more comfortable with it. But really being able to put the time into the tools and figure out what they look like. It's just a continual process as far as marketing is concerned, same as before, where you have to test and learn. And so it's as simple as that. You're testing Claude for content creation. You're testing ChatGPT for content creation. What works better? Is one better than the other? You're going to have debate continually. So I'm not going to get into that debate on specific tools, but what I can say is that it also depends on how you work, the information you're putting into it, and what are you getting out of it, how quickly you can make adjustments, what you can do to quickly learn from it. And again, not as a search engine, but as an actual tool that you can leverage across the board to be able to create content, to be able to create images, to be able to develop and test strategy, to be able to do research, to be able to do analysis. All of those things and more can be done in these tools, and they save you a tremendous amount of time. Now, I still see areas where there's issues, right? Even with something as simple as, hey, let's create, the old standard, let's create a PowerPoint, right? And
Right.
how you're able to utilize that with AI, or how you're able to utilize that even within the Microsoft suite, I think, as one example, is still lacking tremendously. But then there's other tools that you're able to develop inside, as an example, ChatGPT, that you never thought possible before. So just as an example, it's not necessarily specifically in the marketing realm, but it does have some applicability, is the ability to share information with respect to, let's say, an app that you want to create, but it's not necessarily going to be in the app store. So it's more of a web-based app. And then being able to give a framework for exactly what you're looking to create, and then be able to actually generate and use that. Those are things that are highly powerful, have applicability as far as marketing and really anything else that you could dream up. Those capabilities exist now so that you don't need to be able to write code. You just need to be able to communicate effectively. You need to be able to know exactly what your strategy is, and you need to be able to then be able to test the tools that are being created. So, you may start with something in ChatGPT and then it becomes a web-based app. That's just one example of really leveraging a tool to a little bit more extent. There's folks that are doing well beyond that as well, but just giving an example of that it's not just a tool as far as search engine, it's not just a tool to create some fun images. These are tools to be able to create actually things in business as well as your personal life that can help you do more.
Mm-hmm. You touched on a couple things that I want to go a little deeper on. You talked about the settings. You kind of referenced that. And then you also referenced, I think it was earlier in our conversation, but perhaps now, again, about appending a knowledge base. You didn't use the terms knowledge base, but basically giving information to the tool that is going to make the output more relevant. And so I can get even more granular for this question here. I find a lot of organizations don't understand how to append their brand guidelines, their brand voice, or even develop their brand voice, and then tweak those settings to produce what is going to be a very unique, bespoke type of output for that organization. So here's my question, right? I'm contemplating all of this. I'm thinking about brand voice. I'm thinking about our brand guidelines. I'm thinking about all the cool stuff that I want to do. How do I handle intellectual property concerns from my organization or from the output that I'm generating here? If I'm generating images and using logo files, things like that, how do you counsel and coach your clients on that topic?
Yeah, so I mean, it starts with really understanding the regulations within your industry, and then also working with the legal team, whether that's in house or whether that is third party, and understanding what the risks are, and then being able to make decisions. And then I think that's good where we go back to more of that walled garden approach, where you have those knowledge bases that are being created by teams across the board within organizations, where people feel more comfortable because the information that's being pulled is being pulled from the company's own information, as opposed to being collected in various ways from across platforms. So that's definitely one way to do it. I think the other thing too is that you have the ability. So let's say it's style, tone of voice, et cetera, as far as messaging is concerned. I would approach it in the sense that you already should have brand guidelines, and then being able to leverage those, you need to be comfortable, if it makes sense in your organization, to be able to build that into a knowledge base, so that as you're getting information out of a tool that is more relevant, and you don't have to keep teaching it, right?
Right.
I think that's key. But the tools that people are creating with in-house and have those knowledge bases can be tremendously effective, because again, you're not having to search information across an intranet or across a website. It's pulling it for you. It's relevant, or it's doing it just in an automated fashion. So it's not even something that you really have to pull up manually. It's reading information within the system. So let's say it's within a CRM. So there's a question that's being asked by a customer. It's reading that information. It's already providing it back to them. And then being able to look at that and figure out how you can utilize that for things like marketing.
Okay. That opens the door for us to circle back around to the human component, which I'm always fascinated with when I'm having AI conversations. It's this intersection of humanity and technology. And getting a marketing team to actually adopt AI tools, I think that's more of a change management challenge in as much as it's a technological one. We've had a lot of guests on. We've talked about different change management strategies, blah, blah, blah. All that's great. How do you get your team on board, and how do you get your clients' teams on board, and what do you do with the resistors? Because I know they're there. I see them when I give these workshops. So how do you get teams on board, and what do you do with the resistors?
Yeah, so more than anything, it's really identifying who within a specific team has an interest to be a part of what it is you're doing on the AI side. So the curiosity aspect. So starting off with, again, the workflow, and looking at it as helping to support what they're doing and not replace. Figuring out who those people are on your team that could benefit most early enough, and then put together a plan, right? So it's really a test and learn plan. And then being able to then, just like you would with any project that you're doing that's new, is be able to identify exactly what the goal is, how you're going to measure it. And then as you come to successes or failures, that you have a next step there as well. So as far as the AI side, being able to kind of celebrate, so to speak, victories and identify exactly what was done, how much time was saved, how much time, the time that was saved, and what did that roll into an actual dollars saved, so that you can figure out, okay, this is really being efficient. It didn't take away from the individual's role at all. It actually helped them do more with in much less time, with potentially a superior product and a superior outcome. So it's not so much that there's a new template on how to do that. It's really just making sure that you're digging into the tools that AI has to offer to help you do that. Because you'd be doing the same thing if you were testing, output from, let's say, paid search on Google versus paid social, right? You'd come up with a plan. Hey, this is going to fit into our strategy. This is what we're looking at as far as success metrics and what we need to be the outcome. And then along the way, what did you do in order to get to that outcome? So now it's like fitting in the AI tools to be able to figure that out, and then figuring out which tools worked best or how you worked with them. Those are the things that not only I've done, but also I communicate with others, is making sure that you start with a plan. It's really the basics. It's always the basics. Getting people on board is really being able to show them, let's say at the start, a good way is just how much time you're going to save, right? So that you have time to do other things.
So start with a plan. I shouldn't just go wing it.
You can
Radical concept. What do you find in terms of the people piece? Do you find that there's certain roles or functions that are more predisposed to AI adoption than others, or is it across the board?
I think nowadays it's pretty much across the board, but there are definitely standouts, within a marketing team. So I mean, obviously, if you've got copywriters, if you've got designers, those are some that stand out, to begin with, as well as those that are dealing with data, right? Those are kind of standouts. But I believe that everyone in a traditional, so to speak, contemporary marketing team is going to be able to benefit. And a lot of it is also even just through ideation, right? Utilizing the tool as, essentially being able to do research. And again, figuring out what the sources is, asking for the sources, make sure these are not hallucinations, these are real information. But it can speed up research a tremendous amount. And so being able to do that and be able to ideate based on ideas that you have, research that you're doing, and then be able to figure out, how you can put that in place, is pretty powerful, because you're being able to essentially have a sounding board without necessarily having to present the information in a typical environment. So you're able to iterate in a lot faster manner.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to get to that point where you're then like, hey, this is a pretty good idea. Here's what it's based on. These are solid things. I have sources, right? There's no IP issues, and then see where it can go from there.
That research piece is something that gets overlooked an awful lot. And I've been using deep research tools since they came out. And I oftentimes get looked at as if I'm some type of heretic when I can produce a deep research brief on a company, couple that with some established workflows or prompts that I've developed, and get a very specific targeted output for the client. I sometimes I feel like it's burn the witch, right? What did they just do? So.
Right.
I'm interested, since you had surfaced the issue of research and kind of brought that around here, I'm interested, how are you advising clients to use research, and maybe what's a really good example for our listeners about how you have guided someone on using research to get that type of superior output?
Sure. One way is, let's say that you're looking at prospecting to begin with, right? So kind of more on the lead generation side. So being able to use tools, some of them are built within CRMs already, some are sitting outside of CRMs, but being able to dig in and kind of creating a pretty quick model in terms of identifying prospects, individuals, as well as businesses, and then being able to tie in the next steps to that. So being able to set up sequencing and journeys as an example, as far as communication methods. The research that you can do in a lot quicker, more accurate fashion it's changed a lot. And so that is a way to kind of step into that world as far as research is to say, okay, we're a business, we sell things, right? Who are we selling them to? What is going to motivate them? What are the triggers? And how can we more quickly identify decision makers that are at those companies that we need to make contact with? What can we learn about those decision makers that is available through research tools that we can also then confirm is accurate, following the right steps, because that's where you can do a lot of customization. Things aren't as cookie cutter, and then you really develop into that more model that I was talking about earlier, where you might be working yourself or with business intelligence teams and collaborating with them and being able to create segmented lists of existing customers as well as potentially prospects at a much higher level, and then be able to have a much higher return because of it.
Wonderful. All right. Let's I was going to say let's jump in the Wayback Machine, but we don't have to jump in the Wayback Machine. It could be more current.
I remember that. I know that tool.
You remember that one? Yeah. I'm interested in the biggest lesson that you've learned from a mistake in your AI journey, either when you were in that seat or as a consultant, something that you'd tell another CEO or CMO to avoid. Because we've all made some mistakes, and I'm sure there's something that jumps out at you that would help our audience learn from your experiences. So what's the biggest mistake you've made in your AI journey?
Yeah, so I'd say there's probably two things. So one is, don't believe the hype, right? Don't get too excited about a tool that says it can do X, Y, and Z until you actually test it out.
I shouldn't trust the software vendor? What?
So that's one. And then probably the other is really taking that deeper dive in terms of collaborating with the other teams across the organization so that you really can take a look into this in a collaborative fashion. It's not always going to be perfect. Some of the people you're going to have to kind of pull along, so to speak, but really looking at it from the standpoint of we're in alignment because we're all supporting a specific strategy. Everybody's on board with that strategy. So getting that conversation going early enough, it's not so much, well, marketing wants to do this, or IT wants to do this, or customer service wants to do this. It's what's the strategy? Everyone's bought into the strategy. They should have bought into the strategy if they're doing their job and have had input into that, and then have that alignment so that you can collaborate with them towards that end goal. It's not always going to be perfect. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be rough steps along the way, but try to keep that common goal in mind and continue to surface it so that you can stay aligned and be able to get to that next point in a much easier fashion, as opposed to fighting it along the way.
You've referenced strategy a number of times in our conversation, and appropriately so. So this isn't a trick question here. You've referenced strategy appropriately a number of times in our conversation, and when I go in and I work with organizations on strategy, most of the time I am finding that when it comes to AI, they're treating that as a tactical component as part of the strategy, as opposed to something that's going to reshape portions of the strategy. And I firmly believe that we're past the point where that is not possible. I think it's not only possible, but it's probable for a lot of the AI tools and the AI offerings to begin to reshape the overall strategy of an organization. So I'm interested, have you seen what I have seen in terms of tactical adjustment based on AI tools and the evolving landscape there, or have you actually seen it begin to tweak and adjust organizational strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen both. I mean, I think that there's always this comparison. It's like AI and everything that AI can do is so sweeping, similar to the start of the web, right? Now, maybe more so. But it's interesting to your point, because if you kind of think back to, kind of the early days of people utilizing the web on a regular basis, let's say like the late 90s, right? A lot of them were using it very tactical, right? They weren't necessarily using it as a strategic step. And I think the same thing is with AI, is that you have people who are looking at it from a utilization of a strategy, even just from a business model. The folks that are going to win is you really have to look at it from a clean slate and say, okay, utilizing AI, how can we even look at our business strategy overall and figure out, is it is it going to work continually in the next 12 months, in the next 36 months, and so forth. So you have the opportunity now to really start doing research and be able to start doing modeling to figure out, as far as your business is concerned, do you have the right product set? Is it the same product set you've had for 20 years? Are there other products that, based on what you do well as an organization, you should look to test and get into that are going to give you the type of return that you need, that are maybe not as competitive and not as commoditized as other products? That's a key thing to look at that potentially change your strategy, as well as the overall business itself. Getting into new businesses that you haven't been in before.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really interesting point. I've talked about that with an individual or two on this show recently, and I think trying to balance the hype against the reality that we're not too far off from companies being able to A/B test company initiatives. Let me rephrase that. Being able to A/B test actual companies versus product offerings in a way that we've A/B tested web pages and product offerings before. So yes, I like where you went with that conversation about the strategy, because I think there's a whole new vista of opportunity about to open up for organizations here in the coming couple years.
Yeah, I think there's other things that are very interesting that you see talked about as well, since kind of we're talking about here and now and in the future, that are still challenging to kind of get your head around, which is companies that are completely running themselves utilizing AI.
Yeah.
Right, where the amount of hands-on work by humans is so low that it's totally different than what you see today. That's something to really think about and figure out how you can leverage that. And again, I'm not saying it from the standpoint of let's replace the human side, but different types of businesses that you can even test out and run without the same level of investment to be able to figure out if they work. Because sometimes when you're starting off new businesses, new products, et cetera, across the board, especially in financial services and highly regulated industries, that can cost a lot of money and it can cost a lot of time. If you can do something within, so to speak, a walled garden and be able to run it and test it out, you can save a tremendous amount of time. And to your point, that can have potentially a dramatic positive effect over time, on the business.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things that pops up that I've been noodling around recently, and I've seen this out there, so I can't claim that this is a wholly original thought, is how we measure certain types of investment and the types of investment that we're willing to make in organizations. You made the point earlier in our conversation that the IT department should not be in charge of a lot of this stuff, which I completely agree. They have a role to play, but they should not be owning AI deployment, especially within individual business units. And I bring that up because I think right now organizations are very comfortable with the idea of their standard overhead, right? And I'm just going to pick on payroll. Payroll is a standard overhead. I think that this is going to shift to our conversation here from where we're solely worried about overhead and payroll being a large component of it towards perhaps it's compute, right? Or different types of resources that we're deploying there, because we no longer need to throw people at the problems in order to scale and to achieve our results. And the strategic implications of that, I think, are vast, and I wouldn't say they're above my pay grade, but there's a lot yet to be determined there.
Totally agree with that. I mean, we were talking about the research and being able to put together ideas and put them into play.
Yeah.
Utilizing the right tools can save a tremendous amount of time with that, but then also just the processes that are behind certain things that are running. So, one of the things that I've seen in the past was utilizing essentially like ML tools along with other tools to be able to do things that you would think need to be manual, but you're seeing them done right before your eyes. And this is 18 months ago, so some of it may be already well known, but being able to run checks on data and being able to run checks on various amounts of information all in an automated fashion across systems, all happening at one time, can drive down the amount of human involvement by a tremendous amount, and also decrease the cost, increase the efficiency, and allow people to really spend time on the areas that they should be doing, as opposed to kind of more of the monotonous work.
Mm-hmm. So one of the amazing things about where we are now, several years into the AI journey, and we'll be pushing toward our 100th episode this year on this podcast alone, which gives you a sense. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it'll be exciting. So I think one of the exciting things, but also the terrifying thing about where we are is we've got, and we referenced this before, we've got people on such wide ends of the spectrum. So right now we were just talking about machine learning and leveraging a lot of this, and I referenced compute versus payroll. Yet I know we've got listeners, maybe it's their first time. If so, welcome, tuning in right now, and they've just been dabbling, right? So if we were going to bring this back around to the dabbler, to the person, to the leader that's just getting in right now, what type of minimum investments should they be thinking about to begin exploring this, and what should they be doing to begin kicking this off in their organization? Because the best time to start was yesterday, candidly. The second best time is this Monday morning.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So what I would share is that one is taking a look at your business and then being able to identify what tools you want to test with it. If you've got a circle within your industry that you can tap into in terms of what they have used, the learnings from that, both bad and good, can help speed up the process. And then once you're looking at, well, what can I use as, so to speak, like a proof of concept, I think is an important place to start with. So making sure that you're identifying, let's say, like 3, high leverage use cases, tying them, of course, to performance, from a revenue standpoint, from a cost standpoint, making sure, who is actually owning that, you're measuring it, and then making sure that based on what you're measuring, you're able to proceed in, one or many directions. And at the same time, you're still building for yourself and your organization your literacy as far as AI is concerned. And that comes by doing. It does not come by watching. It's one of these things that from the CEO level, all the way across an organization, that people have to really dig in and learn. And there's a lot of different resources for people to learn how the systems work. LinkedIn Learning is a great source. There's also Google, as well as many others, that can give you perhaps a little bit more objective feel than by starting off with some of the tools directly. And so you're also learning from people who are more knowledgeable. I kind of hesitate with that expert side, but are more knowledgeable than maybe where you sit is a good place to start so that you really can dig in. But you got to dig in now because, again, so many people are utilizing AI really just as a search engine, and it's so exponentially beyond that, it's really difficult to even talk about those two things in the same breath.
I think that is a fantastic place for us to conclude our conversation today. An hour goes fast, and if I was going to pull 3 things out from our conversation today, it would be brave, right? Dig in now and find the air quote experts that can help you with your journey, because they are out there, even if we are loath to call them and ourselves experts from time to time. So if people want to take advantage of your expertise, Ondar, where can they find you? What's the best way to reach you and get in touch?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So on LinkedIn, so Ondar Tarlow, very easy to find, unique name, all over LinkedIn. In addition to LinkedIn, also you can go to my website, ondartarlow.org, and you can find me there. You can send me a request, and I'll be able to get back in touch with you.
Wonderful. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed our conversation today, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge and experience with our audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chad. It's a pleasure.
All right. And thank you to our listeners for once again tuning into AI for the C-Suite. If this episode was useful, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on LinkedIn and all the socials, just not Twitter, X, whatever they call it these days, I don't know. And check out AIforthec-suite.com. Until next time, keep your algorithms running, your leadership evolving, and your AI in check. Take care, everybody.